Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. This is Joe DeCarlo, Director of Research and Technology at the Balanced Scorecard Institute. I apologize for this late start, slight technical difficulty on the connection with GoToWebinar, but I think I've got it solved now. So this is the webinar, Shift Your Scorecard into High Gear for Strategy Execution. And we'll be going through a series of slides and a live demo on some monitoring software. And I'll be trying to handle as many of your questions as I can throughout the webinar duration. A little bit on my background. I've been basically working with about 3 different organizations in my work career. Started out with the Milwaukee School of Engineering and senior management and instructor, where I also attended for mechanical engineering and business administration. Went on to the IBM Corporation for the next 25 years and did hardware, software, sales, systems engineering. Got mixed up in some stuff that's actually making a comeback these days in artificial intelligence and knowledge-based systems. And retired from IBM and went for a short term as an executive in residence with an incubator startup in Sunnyvale, Plug and Play Technology, where they have about 260 startups under 2 or 3 different locations. And finally came to work with the Balanced Scorecard Institute, headquartered in Cary, North Carolina. Now, this is my bio information on the left. My email is there if you want to follow up with any discussions. Our corporate website is listed at the bottom there, balancedscorecard.org. Throughout my career with IBM and Balanced Scorecard Institute, I've managed to get around the world quite a bit, either living or working or teaching. And I'm a lifelong learner in that I'm still going to school, and I'm a current doctoral candidate sometime in 2014. Let's talk about a little bit on using the panel that's on the GoToWebinar section for asking questions. Now, I have to give everyone that's on the call a heads up. I'm solo here. Hold on just a second. I think I'm going to get a reset by GoToWebinar here. And let's see if that takes care of it. Hold on a second. I just want to double check something here. In the panel for asking questions, I have to let you know that I'm solo here. It's very early morning here in Cary. I'm solo here, so the way we're going to have to handle the questions is go ahead and ask any questions in the question box. The question box will capture them throughout the duration of the webinar. And if I don't have time to get to those questions, I will respond to all the attendees that came onto the webinar today with direct email follow-up. Also, there's an email address at the bottom, balancedscorecard.org/contact. You're going to want to write that down because later on during this presentation, I have a notation on several slides that said if you'd like to see the rest of this particular plan, fill out the contact form and just say plan, send me the plan. And we'll also get as many questions as we can answered via email as well. The next thing also is, as I mentioned, there will be a recording of this link, and we'll be sending that out to everyone that attended today. Okay, next thing is there's a users conference coming up in March 30th through April 2nd. Many of the topics that I'm going to hit on this early morning here in Cary is going to be taken to another deeper dive level at this users conference. And I would really suggest that you look at the agenda because I think you're going to find that there's at least some topics related to balanced scorecard, strategy development, software monitoring, performance analysis that you're going to find at this conference. And you should take a look at that agenda, and actually I'm one of the presenters that's at that conference as well. Let's go down here. Next, I'm going to level set here because this particular webinar was opened up to anyone that had used Balanced Scorecard, done strategy management, with or without our particular methodology. So, and there might be some new folks on the webinar that are just starting out in strategy management and Balanced Scorecard development. So I have to level set over the next 3 slides on some terminology. And the fact of the matter is that the Balanced Scorecard Institute uses its own 9-step methodology to build balanced scorecards. And in fact, not only at the corporate level, or the Tier 1 level as we call it, but we also talk about cascading this down to lower levels of the organization and use the same 9-step methodology to do that at the departmental or Tier 2 level. Also, there's 9 steps to the process. Assessment, we're going to look at what I call the M&M environment, which is macroeconomic and microeconomic environment, which is part of it. We'll talk a little bit more depth about that and how you use that to put your scorecard into higher gear. You develop your strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about strategy profiles. That's something new that we started about a year or so ago, both in our training programs and with our consultative engagements with clients. Talk about developing strategic objectives that come out of all the assessment work and the strategy building work. Creating a strategy map to show the interconnections between the strategic objectives, the cause and effect links. Creating measures and targets on each of those strategic objectives. You're going to find me saying throughout this presentation that strategic objectives have 2 streams of influence on them. One is the measures and targets in step 5, and the other is the strategic initiatives that are, or projects that are developed off of those strategic objectives in order to help resolve them positively. Technically, at the end of step 6, you can roll out your corporate scorecard at Tier 1. Now, the next step, 7, is performance analysis, or we used to call it automation, so you get some kind of software involved to start measuring the targets, the initiatives, keep track of what's going on in terms of that strategic objective. And then the alignment, we used to call this cascading, is taking that Tier 1 scorecard at the corporate level and cascading those strategic objectives down to the departments and eventually down to the teams and individuals within those departments. And we're going to talk at pretty good length about evaluation. So there's some stops on this 9-step process for this webinar that we are going to spend time looking at in order to see how they perform in terms of putting your scorecard into high gear. The first thing I have to do, though, especially for the newcomers to building scorecards or strategy planning, strategy development through the use of a scorecard, is to answer this basic question. What is a balanced scorecard? Well, what it is in terms of, there are 4 elements to it. There's a communications with clarity, so it's a communications tool. You can communicate the vision and mission and the overall strategy of the organization to all the employees and other stakeholders. It's an alignment tool. We talked about step 8, which is alignment or cascading, so it aligns the day-to-day work to the vision and the strategy. It's also a framework in itself. You'll see a graphic I've got coming up that actually shows what that framework is. And it uses performance measures with targets and thresholds set to see how those performance or those objectives are being realized. So it's a communications tool, it's an alignment tool, it's a framework within itself, and it's a strategic performance measures tool. Usually one of the first questions I get during the classes I teach is, Joe, what is a balanced scorecard? Well, this graphic is a balanced scorecard. It has strategic objectives in the left column, split out by perspectives of financial, customer, internal process, and organizational capacity. And all the interaction between all of the strategic objectives in that column are trying to do 2 things: create value for the customers going up and resolve the vision to a positive nature. So consequently, you've got this graphic that says, okay, now we have got something called commentary. So commentary comes off of those objectives that basically says, what is the description of the objective and what is the intended result? Everyone has to be participatory at all levels where scorecards are developed. So there's an objective owner who's responsible and accountable for each of the objectives. The performance measures and targets, that's one of the streams of influence to that corporate strategic objective, which says, how are we doing or how are we performing? The other stream of influence is the projects, and they must be strategic projects, especially at the corporate level. We don't want things at the corporate level in terms of initiatives that says build a website. That's not a corporate. That is something else related probably to improve brand image, and that's the objective, is improve brand image or improve customer satisfaction. The objective, the initiative at that level might be build a website. So in itself, build a website is not a strategic objective, but it's an initiative off of some higher level objective. And eventually you have to cascade or align that down to departments and then get it down to employee or teams. And I'm going to talk a lot about teams. You'll hear me say teams and individuals in terms of their personal objectives for the scorecard. All right, now, in terms of this webinar, let's talk a little bit. I put this graphic together with these icons about rules of the road. We're talking about high gear, putting your scorecard into high gear. There are certain things that we're going to focus on during this next hour and a half. First, we've got the green lights. These are the tips and techniques that need to be in place. They need to be in place to keep the strategy and the scorecard in motion and to keep it in motion to generate value for the customers as you move through the organization. Plain and simple, the green light elements that I'm going to talk about are the must-dos. Don't do these green light elements, and you are putting your scorecard execution, ultimately your strategy execution, in some form of jeopardy, because these are all interrelated parts, some of which, by human nature, most strategists, most individuals, even executives, don't like to do. They like to do the hard part of creating the strategy or the scorecard, but what about all of the maintenance that has to be done? And that's what a big part of this seminar is about. The next thing is the communications program and alignment efforts across the entire organization. So we've got the typical pit crew on a car here. If you've ever watched any professional racing, the pit crews are highly tuned and they're always in sync with each other. The same thing needs to be in place for organizations. Every organization, everyone in every department, any organization needs to understand what the communications program is, and also why are they doing the certain work that they're doing for a department or a team. And in fact, I say here, make sure everyone knows their required contribution to the organization's strategic success. How about monitoring? Just like your dashboard in your automobile or the dashboard on race cars, those gauges and dials are sending you information about how well your system is doing or how well your scorecard is doing or how well your engine is doing. So we need to do some kind of monitoring on that for the execution side. And then, of course, this webinar was talking about traps to avoid, and those are the red lights. Unfortunately, many of the traps that I talk about during this webinar are those things that they just don't like to do. Communications programs, evaluation programs. They talk a good talk, but many times there's not much action that's put in place. So I categorize these as don't forget to do these, and definitely do not ignore these, because it will come back around to hurt your execution eventually. So what do we mean by the shifts to your scorecard system for high gear strategy execution? Well, I've categorized these into three different categories. Scorecard tune-up. This presumes you have a scorecard, at least at the Tier 1 corporate level. Also, strategically aligning your organization, so they take that Tier 1 scorecard and now we're going to align it or cascade it down to the departments and then eventually teams and individuals. And the third category is how about some monitoring and alignment across the organization. So what's transpiring in terms of that part of the organization? How do we do that? And we talk about things like performance and initiative monitoring, and then I talk about this concept of pulsing the organization. So let's take a look at this first one, which is scorecard tune-up. And we got three parts of this. I'm going to talk about periodic evaluation, which depending on your culture and your organization might be monthly, might be quarterly, might be annually. Reassessment of the M&M environment. And it's not the candies M&Ms. This is macro environment and micro environment. And then we're going to talk about communications programs on the tune-up side of things. When we talk about periodic evaluation, let me pause just a second. I want to check something here. Let's see how we're doing. All right. When we talk about periodic evaluation, we're talking about developing the evaluation plan. What is it that needs to be in that plan, at least at an annual basis? Well, we've got roles and responsibilities. So you're going to see some plans coming up here that talk about the CEO, talk about the SMO, the Strategy Management Office, talks about the department heads, talks about the communications team. These are all critical people that are part of this evaluation side. And you're going to have to develop a schedule and scope. What is it that you want to do? What are the most important things? And more importantly, I'm going to recommend to you some tools that are available to you only in terms of time utilization. All of these tools are one of these tools are readily available from us on our website. The other is something that the strategy profile that you can develop on your own, and I'll give you some hints about how to do that. What about analyzing the actual strategic results against the plan results? You've already got the objectives, you've got the performance measures, you've got the initiatives put in place, and oh, by the way, you're going to hear me use the term initiatives and projects interchangeably because that's what they are. They are hardcore projects, start date, end date, deliverable due dates, deliverable quality, budget expended, under budget, over budget. The translation to all those prior words are Project Management 101. You would be surprised how many times I'm at a client site or I'm in a classroom and I say, how is your organization's about project management execution or project execution? And I'll be honest, sometimes they're very candid and they're frank and they say, we don't do a good job of that. If your organization does not have a track record of good project execution, since that is a stream of influence against the strategic objectives, you have to be very careful about how you're going to approach that. Because if you don't do the projects, you've just cut by at least 50% the impact or the effect on your strategic objective. You still could measure it, but you're not getting the projects done. So how about the background assumptions, look at the performance results, look at the initiative results against expectations. Now, many times during an annual review period, and I'm going to show you the example of one coming up in just a second, you're going to see that there's some changes that have to take place for the strategic elements. For instance, something might have happened in your macro environment that says your customer value proposition has changed, or your vision has changed. A good example why your vision would change is one back in the late 1990s when Starbucks had a vision statement around 1995-96 that said 2,000 stores by the year 2000. Well, they surpassed that 2,000 stores by the year 2000 around 1998. So they had to revise their vision statement. So those are the things you look at during a evaluation period. What about the strategic themes, those 3 or 4 drivers that of the business in general that must be done 24/7 by 365? You just need to keep doing these in order to keep the business in motion. Are the strategic objectives and map current? Are the performance measures and targets the right ones? And who makes the recommendations on the performance measures and targets? The objective owner. They're the ones that are monitoring these on a quarterly, at least a monthly or quarterly basis, or a reporting basis, depending on what the frequency of reporting is. And more importantly, have you solved some of your initiatives and you have to recategorize or prioritize your list? Do some move up in the list because 1 or 2 or 3 were accomplished over the last 12-month period if it's an annual review? Now here's one particular tool that you can use as a part of your evaluation process. And what I would advocate is, over time, depending on what the frequency of your evaluation process is that you administer the Strategic Management Maturity Model. By the way, in the bottom left, balancedscorecard.org, and search on the search arguments SMMM, and you can actually take this online, or you can download the form, create your own version of it, and then send it around and have the administration of it done internally. And then keep the data and see how things are changing over 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, year to year, whatever is right for your organization. The Strategic Management Maturity Model was developed by the Balanced Scorecard Institute, and it looks at 5 levels of maturity. Ad hoc is pretty much, another name for that is command and control. There is no discussion. Leadership suite, executive suite just hands down the directions, everybody follows. The next one is reactive. Leaders dictate but generally get feedback sporadically. Not pure command and control, but they're sporadic. Well, what do you think about this? And they'll take something under consideration. Then we have something called structured and proactive. The leaders model the desired behaviors and values, but engage with direct reports only. So there's not much movement outside of the executive suite, only those that are reporting directly to the executives. There's not full alignment across the organization. And then there's manage and focus. The leaders empower the employees through ongoing engagements. In other words, communications programs, alignment programs, cascaded strategic objectives down to the lower levels of the organizations. And every executive would love to be a level 5, continuous improvements, fully engage in continuous dialogue based on team-based culture, collaboration, empowerment. I mean, so there's very good synergy across the entire organization. The Strategic Management Maturity Model looks at those dimensions: leadership, culture and values, strategic thinking and planning, alignment, there's the cascading or across the entire organization, performance measurement, performance management, you actually take the results of the performance measures and you manage to those performance results, process improvement, which through the use of Balanced Scorecard will identify process improvement opportunities, and then sustainability. Is your scorecard sustainable throughout the process, or does it during this annual review period have to be looked at? So I advocate that you go to that website, search on SMMM, and you can take this test yourself, or this assessment. Well, what does a basic annual review plan look like? And here's one that was developed by one of my clients. They identify the introduction and purpose, and they have some wording behind that. They review and evaluation. So what do they want to look at? They want to look at the strategic foundations. That's all the list that was at the bottom of the second slide prior to SMMM. They're looking at mission, vision, strategic objectives, themes. They're reviewing all of those elements. They have the objective owners make the presentations on every objective on the strategy map, which is excellent because they have to report out now what they've been doing for the last 12 months to monitor these objectives. They administer the Strategic Management Maturity Model. They roll out a communications plan for the next year, how they're going to communicate any changes in strategy that come along, and just general discussions and suggestions in terms of how the strategy is working. Has something changed radically that they need to take a look at? Here's the first trap. And believe me, I've been in many organizations where this is a major trap. They spent a lot of time and money to get their corporate scorecard built. They got it on paper. They might have gone as far as putting some automation in place. and that's it. There's never any evaluation period, or there's casual or ad hoc evaluation of it, maybe at an executive meeting once a year or twice a year. The big trap here is not designing out the evaluation plan or actually even conducting the meetings. So consequently, you got to be very concerned about exactly what's transpiring in terms of your plan, and you have to be diligent about planning for it. So let's take a look at the next slide, which is a sample or an example evaluation plan for tiers 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1, corporate scorecard. Tier 2, departmental scorecard. And Tier 3, the teams and individual goals. Now, this plan presumes that the organization has all 3 tiers. You could be only a Tier 1 scorecard. Consequently, you'd only look at the first 4 rows. Now, first of all, there's 2 columns that are not in this plan because PowerPoint doesn't have the space or the landscape for that. And there's off to the right, after action owner, typical project management 101. What's the intended completion date or the target completion date? And then the last column is what was the actual completion date? So there's some tracking and there's some follow-up here that's put in place so that everybody stays focused on getting these tasks done. Let's take a look at the owners. Who's owner of some of these actions? Well, just initiating the annual strategy evaluation, that really does fall into the purview of the CEO and the SMO, Strategy Management Office, or Strategy Management Officer. All depends on how large your organization is. Sometimes an SMO is also an officer, one person. Other organizations that could have a strategy office with several people working through it. The point is that those 2 people teamed together are responsible for putting the plan in place. They need to get together with the CEO, SMO, and the strategic objective owners at the Tier 1 level. They have to sit in the conference room for a couple of days, talk about elements, do the assessments, and then come out and say, well, we got to make changes to our plan. So that might drive a second follow-up meeting for the next year. Review everything that was done and update if needed. And final step, at a minimum, is to develop and revise the communications plan, especially if you've had changes to your strategy or your scorecard for the next following period. Now we have to also add in a communications team. Could be a communications person. If your organization doesn't have a communications department, you may have, and many do, a marketing office. Those folks know how to do messaging. You just need to help them craft the message, have them help you craft the messages for that. Tier 2s, it's all about department scorecards. They repeat everything from rows 2 to 4. It just is at the departmental level. And again, they can't get away from the communications team. And Tier 3, it's all about department manager. Probably have to involve HR at this point, because when you get down to Tier 3 teams and goals, those goals are usually written into performance plans for the next year. So you have to get HR involved, and you'll have team leads and individuals. This is the first plan that I put the green notification. You can request a full copy of the potential periodic evaluation plan. If you go to that balancedscorecard.org/contact, just put in the message box, I want plans, or just put plans. That's all you have to put, and you'll get all the plans from today's presentation. Let's take a look at this macro and micro environment impact. I don't think there's any geography in the world today that is so isolated from all types of macro impacts or effects from othering geographic areas, both economically, socially, politically, technologically, and environmentally. I mean, we have that here in the United States ourselves. I mean, right now we've got parts of the country that are still frozen heavily, and we got other parts of the country, like where I live in California, we have no water. So we've got all kinds of environmental forces that are acting on just us here in the United States from a climate standpoint. But everyone is impacted by economic forces, social culture. Technological is a big one. I mean, everybody's demanding more technology because they can do more with less. And then eventually that domain surrounds the micro environment, and it starts getting down closer to your organization. The big driver that everyone is usually watching are the customers. If you're a government or a nonprofit, it's the community that you serve. So one or the other. It's either the stakeholders who are the outcome for the nonprofits or government, or it's the customers in general for the for-profit organizations. The point of this slide is you have to do the assessment. You have to sit down in the room and say, where are we being affected by elements that may not be under our control? I will guarantee you that if you don't do this step during an annual review, you will be blindsided by one of these within the next 6 to 9 months, probably within the next 12 months for sure. So you have to sit down and you have to get the executive suite to go through this process and not make this just a casual hallway discussion or cafeteria discussion or lunch or dinner discussion. You need to get serious about assessing these M&M environments. Now let's take a look at strategy profile. Now in terms of strategy profile, this is something new that we started putting together from the Institute in the last couple of years, and we teach it in our classes and we bring it to our clients during our consulting engagements. This is a derivative of the Blue Ocean strategy work that's been put out and publicized, and it takes a look at what we call, in this case, market differentiators. This is not anything highly analytical. It's based on observation and discussion that takes place during this assessment period. Actually, when we do this for building Tier 1 corporate scorecards, this comes just before you start speccing out the potential strategic objectives for the strategy map. Now, if you take a look at those differentiators at the bottom, you're going to see things like function, maybe function, multiple functions, timeliness, economics, quality. Those are all attributes of the beginnings of the customer value proposition. The next thing is the image. How does your organization want to be viewed by your customers, by your community? And then the next thing is, what type of relationship do you want to foster with your customers or your community? That in itself, those differentiators across the x-axis, that is the basis for the customer value proposition. Now, where does all of that information come from? It comes from, and I'll come back to this in just a second, this chart. This is an sequential order of components that you build to create your first corporate scorecard. You're going to see that we talk about business and support processes. You would be surprised when you get the CEO, president, the senior VPs in the room, and maybe some representatives that work for some of the senior VPs, and you get them in the room and you say, let's talk about what the business and support processes are of XYZ organization or XYZ company. Invariably in that discussion, someone will talk about the business and support processes that their respective departments do, and somebody will make the comment, I didn't know we did that. Well, now all of a sudden we just had a learning moment for the senior executive staff. Those things all factor into what your overall strategy is going to come out to be. You're going to talk about your mission, your vision, your values. What is your communication and change management plan? You're going to look at your enablers and challenges or pains, basic SWOT analysis. You're going to put up what your customer needs are. Who are your customers and what their needs are? And then eventually create that value proposition made up of attributes, image, and relationship. Those are all of the inputs for your strategy profile. Let me give you an example of this in action. I recently, for a very large international organization, had the executives, I had about 20 executives in the room, and I said, okay guys, we got all your elements. All those components are up on the wall. Nobody can hide from them. You can go and study them. They're all there for you draw from. Split the 20 executives into 2 teams. Create your strategy profile for me about what your market differentiators are and where you are now and where you need to be. The amazing thing, it's amazing to them. I've done it so many times, it's not amazing to me anymore. You'll be surprised. 2 teams come very close with the same list of differentiators. The green circles are the obvious. When you do blue ocean strategy profiles, you're looking for the white space. In this case, the white space between the competition and where you are. So the green circle on function, if function 1 were something related to what your competition also offers, you know you've got to make up that gap. You've got to close that gap. You've got to do the same thing on timeliness. Maybe, I like to say on this one, maybe your timeliness, on a lot of organizations these days, it's supply chain management. Every organization's always got supply chain management issues. In this case, maybe that's a timeliness issue there. Then finally, what are the relationships? Maybe your organization has a very bad reputation in the industry or the markets you serve, where your competition is like primo. So you've got a situation here where you've got to really do something strategically to close that gap. Well, as it turns out, this strategy profile starts to set the themes and results for your organization, those 3 or 4 things that must be done. Is it operational excellence? Is it strategic partnering? Is it better innovation? That will come from your strategy profile and all the other components that are up on the wall. And then you have to create your perspectives and your objectives, the strategic objectives, and so forth, going down through this components list. My point in using this components list is this was something that was done at the very beginning of the corporate strategy build, and now you're using it again during the evaluation process. And in this case, this particular client said, well, we had some changes in business processes, yellow. We had some changes in communication plan, yellow. Definite change in customer value prop, so that, and also the enablers and pains, and definite changes to the profile, which in turn drove changes to the initiative, the measures, the strategic initiatives, and well as some slight changes on the objectives and commentary. And then down below, they had already cascaded. This particular client's already through tier 1, 2, and 3. Well, the minute you start changing the strategic objectives on the corporate level, you're going to have an impact of some extent on the alignment of the cascading side. So you can start to see how these things repeat themselves during an evaluation period, or in this case, an assessment period. Okay, so what are the traps on this reassessment period? Well, the first one is not doing the planning and not executing it on that plan. The second is going to be a repeat. It's the sufficient allotment of time to do this. This evaluation or reassessment cannot be, as I said earlier, a hallway discussion, a lunchroom discussion. Can't be a coffee meeting discussion. This is hardcore homework that you have to go through and research. So a lot of sufficient time. And you have to communicate and collaborate with a large number of people, strategic objective owners at all the organization levels, and the entire leadership and management. Well, what about this communications plan that has to be done for a reevaluation during the period of evaluation for the overall plan? Here is some examples. Once again, the 2 columns about target and actual completion date are not on here. They are on, I put a cross again at the bottom if you want this plan to say balancedscorecard.org/ contact, fill in, just put the word plans in the message box. These are all things that are done to move the communications out that says, oh, all of that strategic, some of that strategy has changed from the prior year because of this, this, and this, and here's the minor changes to our strategy. Still, we're moving forward. Initiative listings changed. We reprioritized some of those. So consequently, there's a whole group of owners, some action outcomes, and some action items. Now, Let's talk about that first row for a second. Because whenever I talk with clients and they say, I say, well, when's the last time you pulsed the rank and file? Well, we do an annual survey. That should be enough. I'm going to say, okay, fine. When do you do that annual survey? Well, at the end of the year. Well, doesn't the psychology of end of the year in December tell you that you're going to get different answers? Because let's face it, if you're on a calendar fiscal year, everybody is kind of happy it's in December because they're going to have 1 or 2 weeks off. You know, everybody's gone on vacation. I'll answer the questions laissez-faire. And it's like not exactly the optimum time to be doing that. Okay, so fine, we'll wait till the first quarter. Well, let's talk about the psychology of that. Well, that's the evaluation period. Do you really think you're going to get an unbiased response in the first quarter when you've just sat down with your manager to find out that you're only a brand or a level 4 on a 5-scale system, or you're a level 3 performer? I don't think the response to the survey is going to be what you're looking for. So one of the things I've started introducing with clients is let's start to do a statistically significant random sample. Let's start incorporating some analytics into this and say, well, if I've got 1,000 employees, how many do I really have to pulse to find out if they understand what the strategy of the organization is? Well, is it 30? Is it 100 out of 1,000? You have to go through some statistical analysis to take a look at that. It doesn't have to be, and this whole point of this discussion on surveying or pulsing the organization, you have to get away from this thought that I have to get 100% response. I have to go against all the employees or rank and file or all the managers, whatever your target zone is. Let's get to a significant sample of the population and extrapolate from there. But the more important thing is strategy communication is not about sending an email to all of the rank and file and say, here's the strategy. Please read the following attachment. Not going to work. You got to get a two-way dialogue going. One-on-one, small group. I'm not a big fan of these all-hands meetings that most organizations do. Let's get all 500 people in an auditorium, do some music, hand out some awards, do a rah-rah discussion about strategy, and think that it's done. It's not. That has the cascader aligned from the corporate office down to the department managers. The department managers have to get together with the smaller groups. I've got one student in my class that's using this huddle concept. He's actually talking with small groups. He's investing a lot of time to make sure that the strategy gets communicated properly. Two-way communication is always better. Keep it dialogue. Anything in that green line area really is only one way. There's not a discussion going on. So consequently, get up into the blue area and get up as close as you can to one-on-one or small group. Well, once you decide back on the communications plan what the action item is, you have to put the messaging in play. And here's a form that says, and by the way, this form is complete, who's the target audience? What desired behavior are you trying to enlist from that audience? What are the potential resistance issues? And you know, everyone inside of any organizations, they know this. Sometimes they don't like to talk about what the resistance issues might be. But here is the most important one. You're sitting out in the audience, or you're sitting in a small meeting, and you're hearing your manager or your chief executive talk about strategy. Sooner or later, I will guarantee you during the course of that dialogue, you are going to silently internalize the question, what's in it for me? Why should I be following this guy? Why should I be making these contributions? So when your communications team puts that messaging together, they better really think about what's in it for the listener or receiver. They have to put themselves in their shoes. Let's get away from the MBA speak or the doctoral speak and get it down so that it's very easy to understand. So what are the key messages? What medium are you going to use? Hopefully it's going to be small dialogue, face-to-face, and who's going to deliver the message. If you don't believe me on this communications business, you cannot ignore John Kotter, who was the author of Leading Change, is probably the godfather of change management. Here is 2 of his 8 errors, and the one is on the left, lower left cell, under communicating the vision. You might as well say vision or strategy by a factor of 10, 100, or even 1,000. Basically, he says you cannot over communicate. But the box on the right cell is one of his solutions to this, is consider every possible form and media to carry your strategic message to employees. If you want this to work, you have to get it to everyone. So think about how you have to do that. So what are the traps on a Tier 1 communications program? Well, not designing the plan, in other words, the action items or deliverables, and assigning owners, and not completing the messaging template. That's all work, hard work. And you know what? If you're a technical firm, most engineers and scientists hate to do this. They just do. Having come from a mechanical engineering college and curriculum, they had to force us to take public speaking classes because it's not in the DNA of a technical person to really want to communicate with a large audience or even do one-on-one. Yeah, small groups are fine, colleague to colleague is fine, but I got to communicate something as large and encompassing as the strategic plan and direction to a large group. They don't like to do it. You got to do it. Allow sufficient time, and again, make sure you involve a large group of people in setting up that plan or communications plan. But more importantly, if you fail to seek out the communications team or person assistance, you're putting that in jeopardy because they know how to do that messaging template. They can help you do that. All right, so let's take a look at the next step, which is I've got the Tier 1 message in place, and how do I want to take a look at aligning the organization? Well, there's a process involved, and it's a very easy process. The one thing that I've talked about so far in the scorecard tune-up, and what I'm going to talk about here in the aligning the organization, and I said this with the webinar yesterday, this stuff is not rocket science. This stuff is human interaction, doing the homework, setting the plans up, laying the groundwork, communicating with people, getting buy-in, and bringing them on board and making them part of the process. I had a question yesterday come from the group. They said, we have a large influence from our stakeholders or our board. You know, how can we put a Tier 1 plan in place if they're continually trying to command and control what we're doing? And I replied, you have to engage them in the process. When you start the Tier 1 build process, you bring the representatives into that working group. It becomes their plan then. They felt like they were asked to contribute to it. The other thing is, again, this is not going away at the Tier 2 level or the Tier 3 level. You got to have some communications programs in place. So let's take a look at this next section. Alignment or cascading, again, not rocket science. What are you cascading from Tier 1? The strategic objectives. Remove from your thought process, because this usually pops up in several engagements over the course of a year. They want to cascade those initiatives from Tier 1. Wrong. Those projects are organization, corporate level wide. Very big projects. For instance, one of them is improve supply chain management system. That's not going to be something that a Tier 2 department can do on its own. That's a Tier 1 initiative. You don't cascade initiatives. You cascade strategic objectives. You take those down to Tier 2, and then eventually the teams and individuals are asked by their managers, what do you need to do to contribute to the strategic objectives of my department or Tier 2? Now, notice We don't talk about vision in Tier 2. Why? And we don't talk about strategic themes. Those are two strategic components that are in the total purview and control of the corporate level scorecard. Where do we want the vision statement to be adhered to take us forward? And what are the 3 or 4 strategic elements that we have to do over the course of a normal 24/7 by 365 period? We have to be operationally excellent. We have to be innovative excellence. We have to be customer intimacy, whatever it takes. But we have to do these 3 or 4 things all the time, 100%. Everything else, though, can be reviewed by the Tier 2, and they come up with their own scorecards. So one of the key things down here is department business purpose. You ask how many departments have a purpose statement or a mission statement? Many do not. And consequently then, when you've got the employees for a department in, for Tier 2, you ask them what's your purpose or mission, and it's either totally silent or a couple of people say, well, I think it's this. Got to design that. They have to know what they provide and for whose benefit they provide that service or product or whatever it is. This is what it's all about in terms of alignment or cascading. Tier 1, as I said, what do we need to do in terms of strategic objectives to achieve our vision? Next thing at Tier 2 is I have to cascade those objectives down and say, what does my unit have to do to contribute to that strategy? Which of the strategic objectives at Tier 1 scorecard do I strongly influence and affect at the Tier 1 level based on the nature of my Tier 2 department? Really, it's the influence. Which ones do I strongly support and can influence? Then eventually down to the teams and individuals, how do I contribute what I do on a day-to-day basis to what needs to be done for the department? If everybody's firing on all cylinders and the performance is in the green zone based on design, those performance numbers roll up to the corporate scorecard, and boy, the executive suite is happy because they can drill down into every one of the performance measures, and they can track the projects or initiatives at all levels, and they're saying, yep, everybody's firing on all cylinders, performance is all green zone, we should be doing exactly what we said we were going to be doing. And it should come as no surprise that as you go left to right at this, you're going from a strategic direction to a more tactical, what happens day to day. So here's an example, a very simple one. The corporate scorecard says we have a problem with customer access, whatever that might be. And it's, improve customer satisfaction. Tier 2 says, well, I can have an influence over that. I can improve my department's ability to assist the customers. If I can do that, by its nature, I'm going to improve their access. Percentage of processes automated. Maybe they're manually driven at the present time. Tier 3 employee says, I want to improve my customer service skills because that can help me better assist the customers. And if Tier 2 does that in the green zone performance, does it very well, I'll improve the ease of access for the organization as a whole. And in the case of teams and individuals, the department has said we got to put a customer or service skills exam in place, and we'll measure your skill level going in and coming out and seeing if there's been a change that we can quantify. Pretty straightforward. Now, here's where this is not rocket science. So let's say we've got a Tier 1 scorecard that already exists, and it's that Mayberry Utilities Commission on the left there. And next thing is we want to cascade down to the Tier 2 departments. Well, first order of business, same thing as Tier 1. Go back to the strategic components chart that I showed you earlier with the red, yellow cells that had been done as a part of the reassessment. Remember I said that components list was the build list, or the bill of materials, so to speak, to build the Tier 1 scorecard. So now we can say, let's look at the key business and support processes. If there was ever a time when you've got 4 or 5 representatives from a department, almost regardless of size, number of headcounts in these departments, and you start talking about these services and processes again, you're invariably more frequently going to get somebody say, I didn't know we did that. And here it's just the department, let alone the organization. They need to develop or validate their mission or develop or purpose statement. They need to talk about who their customers and stakeholders are. Some departments are cost centers. They serve only the internal organization. Some departments are revenue centers, so they're very customer-centric, very customer-oriented, externally oriented. They have to determine their own value proposition. They have to determine their enablers and challenges. They have to determine what their objectives at the Tier 1 level they strongly support or have influence under. So would I ever expect to see in the case of Mayberry Utilities Tier 1 every objective down in Tier 2? Absolutely not. This happens to be the gas department. Does the gas department have anything to do with electrical or water distribution? No. So those objectives are very gas department oriented. But in this case, you can see there was one or two that they did support. They had improved the natural gas marketing that has an impact on the Tier 1 improved communications. So they did have a strong support of that particular one. There are others. Created objectives, map, targets, and you set the strategic initiatives as well. Same process at Tier 2 for the most part that you did at Tier 1. Let's take this down one more level. We've got Tier 2, gas department. Now we need to align to the teams. Here's the process on the teams. Notice, we can talk about team goals that support the team Tier 2 department goals, but there's no map. This is very tactical execution level. Back on that example, what do I need to do in terms of improving my customer service skills? Some organizations, by the way, look at this Tier 3, teams and individual, as very initiative project execution. I want to hold the team or individuals accountable for executing on assigned projects or initiatives. That is very tactical. You will start it on this date. You will end it on this date. You will have your deliverables reviewed. Did you have the deliverables at 100%, 50%, or 0%? Oh, and by the way, the budget for this initiative or project was this, and you came in either under, dead on it, or worst case, over. Some organizations get very tactical. Some take a little higher road, which is, well, you got to do some better skill improvements. The other thing, too, is you have to look at your environment or your organization and say, do we have a lot of incidents of teams being formed for short periods of time? Let's say 5 of you are put together on a team. You've got a special project for 6 months, and then you kind of go back and do your regular job, so to speak, or your individual job, and then the last 6 months goes into review for your annual performance review. But what happens to the review of your performance as a team? There are some organizations that do this very well because the cultural makeup of their business is they can't get things done unless they've got teams. They got to have cross-functional impairments that they have to go and borrow people of various skill levels and put them on a team. Those organizations do a very good job of evaluating the performance of the team member and bringing that forward to the annual review process. If your organization does not do that, you're really missing an opportunity to really have an impact or an effect on the individual that's as of a team, because you should be evaluating what the team performance is as a whole. And this is where you usually get into things like team charters. What's the rules of the road for being a team member? What are you going to do for conflict resolution? What are you going to do if somebody's late? All those kind of things. So think about it, how you're measuring that and adding that contribution of team performance into the annual review. And then we have Tier 2 to Tier 3 for individuals. If you don't use any teams, somebody just does their regular job every year, these are all things you have to take a look at. And oh, by the way, does your organization have as a baseline for Tier 3 goals, especially on individuals, do you have rock-solid job descriptions? Because that whole process on teams and individuals starts with a fundamental requirement that you've got good job descriptions in place. How else can you have this discussion if you don't have they don't understand exactly what their job is. Okay? What are the traps associated with this? Well, you don't complete the Tier 1 scorecard. Don't even think about doing cascading or alignment until you got Tier 1 done. And that means the measures, the initiatives, everything's wrapped up. And in fact, you rolled out the Tier 1 scorecard. And then eventually not methodically developing departmental strategic elements. In other words, you're not doing the alignment process that I just went over. Again, not allowing sufficient times. I've had some clients that say, yep, we get done with Tier 1, we wait 2 weeks, and we start with Tier 2. Timeout. We don't even have the Tier 1 fully operational yet. Why would we want to start cascading in 2 weeks? We don't know. You got to measure that Tier 1 scorecard over a period of months, maybe even half a year, a couple of quarters. See if it's giving you the results that you designed into it before you start saying to the departments, oh, everybody aligned to this Tier 1 scorecard. Not exactly the best thing to do. And another trap is don't involve the entire departmental leaders. This is team leaders. This is people that are in charge of very specific job functions that have a high dependency on other results within the department. So involve enough. This can't be just the manager sitting in his or her office drawing up the strategic plan for Tier 2 and especially for Tier 3. Here's a communications plan, and I want to draw your attention to, and again, balancedscorecard.org/contact, fill in the message box plans. You can put any other messages in there you want to, but I see the word plans, and I'll send you these plans. Look at that lower left cell. This was a concept that I used when I first started managing. Managing by wandering around. By the way, you want to use that phrase to search in a website called mindtools.com. Mindtools, all one word, .com. And put in managing by wandering around. You will see displayed. It's an old concept. It was originally brought forth by Waterman and Peters in a book called In Search of Excellence. And they describe managers that got out of their office and wandered around unscheduled meetings, coffee cup in hand, saying, hey, Jane, how's it going today? Or, hey, Bob, what kind of issues do we have at the current moment? When used effectively, you can knock down, in my estimation, over my time in my work life, 90% of your problems. Small sparks, small flame-ups will be squashed before they become major league fires or firefights or crises. Now, the first kickback I usually get in this day and age is, Joe, I've got 100 people. I can't wander overseas. I can't wander across the Atlantic or the Pacific. Doesn't matter. You can do this with a telephone call. You can do this with a Skype call. You can do this any way you want, but it doesn't have to be a scheduled meeting. And you know what? The thing that also builds into, in terms of the dialogue and the communications, is all of a sudden the people who you are responsible for feel like, hey, Joe really cares about me. He just picks up the phone and calls me when he's got a question or whatever. And it doesn't have to be a crisis situation. It can be just, hey, I just want to check in, see how things are going. So that's managing by wandering around. Look at mindtools.com, managing by wandering around. You can do unscheduled pit stops, whatever. Again, not designing the plan, not completing the messaging template from the Tier 1. You got the same messaging template, by the way, at Tier 2. Again, not sufficient time, and not involving the departmental leaders. So you got a real issue here in terms of going forward. Let's talk about this last section before we come to the bottom of the hour and a half, and I appreciate those that are hanging in here. You got monitoring and alignment across your organization. What can we use? What tools can we use to help us get a glimpse of what's going on at any point in time? And one of those is an initiative in pulsing the organization in terms of employee engagement or employee reactions to a survey. So first of all, let's take a look. We're going to use our Mayberry guide that we used before with Tier 1 and Tier 2. We're going to look at Tier 1. And I put these screenshots in for you just so you can see the extent of what you can look at. Now, this is the Mayberry, the revised Mayberry Utilities went through an evaluation period, revised their strategy map at Tier 1 down to this compared to the prior slide. But more importantly, in an instant, they can look at that strategy map, which, by the way, you've used to communicate the strategy of the organization across the entire organization. So people are used to seeing the ellipses with some wording in there saying that those are the things that we need to focus on. Well, now, in terms of some monitoring and performance software, you have the ability in a glimpse to say, well, we got some good objectives that are doing well based on how we define the performance measures and initiatives. We've got 2 that are absolutely terrible, and we've got some that are middle of the road that are yellow. And, oh, by the way, we've got some indicators that are, in some respects, backward looking. They're saying the prior reporting on improved customer value was trending, it was yellow, and it's trending downward. So based on an analysis of several reporting periods, it's saying, well, it's yellow now, it's going to be yellow in the next reporting period, and oh, by the way, if this keeps up, sometime in the next few reporting periods, since it's trending downward, it could go into red. Expand customer base is red. It's saying neutral. Just keep doing what you're doing, and it's always going to be red. On the other hand, we've got some down here that says, okay, improve knowledge, skills, and ability. It's green now. Looking at what happened in the past reporting periods, if it stays steady state, it'll continue to get better green. It might not be 100%, but better. Okay. I want to show you this one. This is also, I'll show you this live. A lot of executives like to see the perspectives. Perspectives are the lenses into the scorecard. So in this case, this happens to be a nonprofit. Utilities normally are, or governmental organizations. So the financial and customer perspectives swap locations. Profit-making businesses or for-profit organizations always have as their final outcome, it's all about the money. It's an increase in profits, it's reducing costs, and increasing revenues. You don't have to do much thinking after a while about what needs to be in the financial for-profit organizations. Customer, though, it's a whole different story for for-profits. It's all about keeping the customer happy, keeping the brand moving, and in the case of government and nonprofits, though, it's all about the customer, the community that they serve. The other 2 perspectives are staying in the same order in the Balanced Scorecard Institute methodology and basically the fundamental structure of a balanced scorecard. You start with the employees and the organizational capacity. Do you have the right people with the right tools and the right jobs? Tools could be infrastructure as well as knowledge, skills, and ability, and the right talent. You can put those together and put them to use and do something internally, which helps, in this case of Mayberry, their financial situation, such as budget utilization, budget allocation, effective use of funds, etc., and eventually their customers are the outcome. For-profit organizations, it's all about keeping the customer happy, and then you get that increased profits, or you can reduce costs, or you can increase revenue or sales. And then we also can see some very specific things like employee engagement, talking about the pulsing. I can see over a period of time how that's been tracking. And that's why, in some regards, you can see how this was ranking up around the 70s and 80s and prior, and now it seems to be going down pretty steady state down into the 60s. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? You'd have to do some drill down to understand what that is. And here's another report that looks at the initiatives, and there's that one about employee engagement. And you can see it has related items. This is a good report because it shows the impact or the effect of initiatives that have been spec'd out. And what do I mean by spec'd out initiatives? That means resources has been allocated to them, people and money. This is where most executives grip the table the hardest when you start looking at projects and initiatives and say, oh, I need 20 people and $1 million to do this particular project. That's going to get attention. You better have an ironclad business case about why. Well, one of the ways to do that is to show the impact of an initiative across various objectives. This one happens to be different related items that you put up in the system. that says if we've got good employee engagement, we're going to have a good solid response to employee productivity, community image, and overall we've got another measurement called employee engagement. So let me do something in the time we have remaining and go to a live side of this site. And bear with me just a second here. Oh, didn't want to do that. I got to go back down to, I got that set up here. And let me show you how some of this becomes in terms of monitoring what's going on in the system and the organization. By the way, this could also be monitoring in the entire Tier 2 organization and Tier 3 as well. Bookmarks, it starts here because I've said this is where this is the first screen I always want to see. I just want to be reminded, right or wrong, of what our mission, vision, and core values are. But where the real power comes in is this option called reports and briefing books. What's the difference between reports and briefing books? Well, maybe in terms of the authorization of what you can view. I mean, by the way, viewers are no charge in this particular system, so you could open up the entire dam and let everybody look at everything if you wanted to, but you could restrict it. Reports are usually you're going to see are internal, and briefing books might be sent to stakeholders, board of directors, special people that only have authorization to look at briefing books. And by the way, they can't change any of the data or anything like that. So let's take a look first at these briefing books, and we'll take a look at the Tier 1 organization. Now, here's a good example of something that I experienced with one client when we started building out the scorecard. Then we started cascading down to Tier 2. As you start to do this cascading process and you get the system set up to take these strategic objectives, initiatives, maps, and all that kind of good stuff, until you get all that stuff in the system, it's grayed out like you see here. Well, that's a surefire sign to the executive suite or the SMO office up here, you can see is active, that these guys at Tier 2 are not doing their work. They're not doing their homework. They're not getting their stuff put in the system. So that triggers a telephone call or an email saying, hey, I was just on the system, performance system, and your stuff is grayed out. You haven't put anything in there. When are you going to have it in? And over a very quick period of time, you can start seeing these elements start to become blue instead of gray. So let's take a look at these reports. And here we've got a couple of reports at the Tier 1 level. And here's the one that everyone likes to take a look at, is the projects. Where are we on these projects? What's the start date? What's the due date? What's the completion date? Where were we on the budget? We can take a look at any one of these and get some detail on it. But projects, and the culture of Mayberry is that it's all about the projects because they're a utility company, they're high dollar, long haul, and they want to be able to track exactly what's transpiring. And you can see here these stars are part of, these are actual stars are strategic objectives, and these are targets related to some of these elements in here. So if we take a look at employee engagement and take a look at what's transpiring there, we can see, well, here it is over a period of time, and here it's got some sliders. So let me give you the whole shooting match here and expand this out and let the system refresh. And I can come across here, and for all of these reportings, it's been pretty steady state yellow. So some exec might say, well, this is good. It's in the yellow. We don't have to contend with anything down here in red. But how do we start moving this up closer to the green? What do we need to do? And consequently, you can see that there's some related items to this that they might want to start taking a look at. And there might be some impacts, especially if there's relationship that says, well, overall employee engagement has a certain alignment or effect on from innovation process, customer service. That might be drawing down that as well. So let's go back and take a look at one more here. This red. This is always one that most managers and execs just love. I don't care anything else is going on in the system or in the organization. I want to know about where the firefights are coming. Where are the red ones? So in this case, we can see exactly what's transpiring here. So let's take a look at something like, let's take a big hitter. System uptime, 99.41. I mean, that's looking pretty good, but you can see what's transpired here over a period of time. We've got a pretty good rainbow of colors here, so we might want to start taking a look at what's going on here in terms of the related items. Do they have an impact on this, and can it make some change? So let's go back here, and I want to take a look at, I don't want to look at dashboards yet. I want to take a look at briefing books. And here's another one that's, here's your one that you saw earlier. Here I can click right on customer value and take us back to that one, and it'll take you right down, so you can go right inside from the chart, the balanced scorecard itself. And let's get me back to those reports or the briefing books. And here's the red one. And here's one that's interesting. Here's another one that these execs said we're really looking at the performance measure effectiveness. We've had some problems. We moved it. We said we were going to put some things in place to move it up in the green, and it looks like we're having some good effect on that. And in fact, if I move the slider back and say, give me all the periods, what does it look like where it came from and where is it now? So trend line, very nice improvement on this one. So whatever they put in place in terms of the index is giving him the information they were looking for. So here is a good example of an index. They said this measurement on Workforce Effectiveness Index has got 3 components: career plan completeness, organizational culture score, which is probably an index in itself, and the number of training days. And you can see the actual value here, how they put that together, and it comes up with an index for them. And you have to understand data normalization, etc. I mean, at a certain point in time with performance measures, you have to become a little analytical, and that's why strategic objective owners are not doing all of these particular tasks by themselves. They have performance measure assistant or performance measure owners that help them, and they typically have project managers that handle one or more particular projects along the way. All right, let's take a look at another briefing book, and that happened to be, that was the leadership. Now let's take a look at what the managers are interested in. Well, managers always get hounded about improved financial performance. So in this case, we've got a briefing book on this one for a performance measure report on improved financial performance, and we can see at any point in time where the problem areas are, and you can see the performance measures here that they're looking at from that side. They all like that perspectives is good at the management level. You can give them an easy, early heading on what's transpiring across the perspectives. That is just a little example of what you can do to get the performance measurement side and monitoring in place. Now, I've kind of watched the question box, and I didn't see any questions come in. So here's the deal. I want you to go back, and in fact, I'm going to back this up in just a second and show you this email address. And you can send me privately any questions you might have from this presentation. And my last advice to you is to get our book, because everything that was in this presentation is also in this book. So you can go to balancedscorecard.org, the Institute Way. You can get it on Amazon as a Kindle ebook as well, a Kindle book. So it's very easy to get the information. But more importantly, take all the things that, especially if you've got a working core scorecard system now, make sure you pay attention to those areas that were traps, get those resolved, and just go for it. I mean, you've really got the basis to really put your scorecard into high gear. Now, let me back up, and because I was running this solo this morning here, this is my email address, okay, right here. And if you want to send any questions you want from this webinar directly to me, I will answer them very easy to do. Those of you that are here too, if you want to bypass the contact / contact and want the plans, if you don't want to communicate with me privately, that's fine. Go to balancedscorecard.org / contact and just say plans, and our administrator will make sure you get the plans. And there will be a link that you'll get a notification of that you can listen to the replay. I really appreciate everyone's attention for the time period that we're here for an hour and a half. And again, if you have any questions, shoot me an email. I do live in California, so I'm in a little different time zone than out here in Cary, a 3-hour difference. And originally I was supposed to be doing this at home with an assistant, but project client requirements got me out here to Cary. So not to take you longer than the hour and a half, I really appreciate everyone's attention, and I hope this was informative. Drop me a line, shoot a comment, request a plans through balancedscorecard.org / contact, and take a look at the Users Conference agenda in March in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's a nice setting, and you'll hear a lot about a lot of the things that you experience on this webinar. Appreciate your time and attention. You guys have a good rest of your day, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.